Hello, this is SickleYield, and today I am here to talk to you about lighting and rendering in Iray in 2022. I'm going to share some best practices for making specifically promotional images because a viewer or a reader or a customer recently said to me that they didn't believe it was possible for a user to get the results that I get in promotional images. And so I'm going to walk through just exactly how I do that for all of you. And it is certainly the case that I am not the best promotional renderer in our market, but I do my best, and I do succeed in making a living selling these products commercially. And I am very willing to share with you what I do know. So here we are in Daz Studio, and I've got the main promotional image from my Rippling Water Iray product. You can see the final here up on my screen. I'm going to minimize that now. And now I've got the file open here in Daz Studio. You can see I have a default camera here. Under Edit, Preferences, I have set it up to always add a camera when I create a new scene. Under the Startup tab, it says Load File. I don't actually do that. But under the Scene tab, I do have it checked to create a default camera. Let me cancel that out. So the default camera over here in the Parameters tab, you can see that under Headlamp, I have it set to off first and very important. And when I'm navigating about the scene, I don't use the default camera for that. In this drop down at the top right of the 3D window, I switch it to the perspective view. And that's what I use for looking at the bigger scene and not just the view that the camera sees. Now here you can see my actual rendering camera viewed from the top here, the default camera. And in this case, I do not have depth of field on, but you can see those settings in Parameters under Camera, the option to add depth of field, and the focal length and the f-stop. Now something you might notice here is that I have my focal length set to 35. 65 is the default. Let's go back here to default and see what that looks like. If I leave that at 65, it looks more like this. The reason I set it to 35 is because that pulls outward from the scene more, and as you can see, it does distort perspective more, but sometimes you want that distortion of perspective to create a more dramatic scene. You can also see, when I go back to that perspective view, that the camera is tilted out of the primary axis of view so that it's actually tilted a bit to the right. Every promo doesn't have to have a Dutch angle, but a lot of them do just because it looks more dramatic. So that's what I did with the camera. Now, the scene itself, I actually just used products without a lot of alteration to them in this case. So I used the Botanical Garden, which is for sale in the Daz store. Didn't do a thing to it, I don't think. I think that's all the default settings of items in there. I used, let's see, on Genesis 8 Female, I used a character called Airi by Cyberblue, A-I-R-I. I don't believe I made any alterations to her settings. Sometimes when I render with a character, I'll go to the Surfaces tab, to Skin, Lips, Nails, and turn down the translucency and or the SSS, because sometimes those are very high, and I want them to be lower, especially when I'm viewing a character from a distance, and the effect of high translucency won't really be seen. But in this case, I actually just left it at high translucency and didn't touch the transmission and scattering settings at all. So that's just the settings that Airi came with. Her morph is default. And the outfit she's wearing is Rock's Elite. I didn't make any alterations to that either. She's wearing the spiked punk hair with a texture that it came with. And the reason she looks dirty is because she has a dust shell conformed to her that came with the product A Dirty Mess, which is a product I make. The gun she's holding, I don't remember if it came with Rock's Elite. Oh, it did. It did. It's the Rock's Elite Agitator Rifle. Yes, indeed. So that's all just the Rock's Elite outfit, plus the dust shell from SY A Dirty Mess. Now you can see that I added water to this scene because water is the product that I'm advertising. So in this case, I'm going to go up here to the top right, to this other drop down, and change it to, let's see, Wire Texture Shaded, so that you can get a little bit of an idea where the water plane actually is. Still a little hard to see there. There's a water plane that comes to about her ankles, and you can see that I've added the ripple piece there around her feet, around her shin area. Set that back to smooth shaded. Let's try smooth shaded. Smooth shaded still shows the transparency, but you can see the ripple piece, and you can see that it's sitting on top of a water plane that also came with the water product. And then I've got all of these little rigged drips in the scene. There are 6 of them in the scene, and I created their own group for them to make it easier to organize them. And how you do that is you select items by clicking on them in the Scene tab and holding Shift and clicking another item at the end of a list will select everything in the list. And then when you have multiple things selected in the scene, you go up here to Create and New Group. And it will allow you to create a group and name it, and then you can hide or show all of the items in the group at once. As you can see there, I clicked the little eye icon and my drips all disappeared. This can also be extremely useful when you need to hide or show things in a scene in order to move about the scene faster, because in particular, if you have Genesis 8 female or Genesis 8 male with HD morphs on, those are going to lag your 3D Windows navigation significantly. But hiding them will make things go much faster, and you may want to hide them once they're set up until you're ready to do the actual render. Now, perhaps the most important thing when it comes to getting the exact look of a render is the lights. I'm going to go back to texture shaded here. And the render settings. Now, in the render settings, you can see that I have an environment map on here. That's probably not going to show very much, actually, because this is a fully enclosed set. See if I can zoom out from below here so you can see the roof. There it is. There's the roof. This is a fully enclosed set, so we're probably not getting much effect from the environment, but I turned it down to 1.5 anyway. In fact, I almost always turn down my environment because I don't want it to interfere with my scene's lights. And the environment map, unless it's a very specific type of HDRI, is going to tend to flatten and smooth the lighting in your scene. That might be what you want in certain types of scenes, but it's very seldom what I want for a promo. Under tone mapping, in this case, I turned up the exposure to 14, which mutes the effect of my lights, because once again, it also turns down the effect of the environment map, and I wanted to leave the environment map at a lower value, but then turn up my other lights to make them more visible. And those other lights, this is a doctrine that I'm going to use in nearly every render. There will be exceptions, but when they're commercial renders of this type, not many, I'm going to use a Keylight and a rim light. Because in photography, I might also be using a fill, but in this case, the environment map is acting as my fill. Now, if you've seen my other lighting tutorials, you've seen me do other key, fill, rim setups, 3-point lights. But in this case, the effect of them will be a little different because I turned down the environment significantly. The key plane in this case is this one over here. It's going to be brighter than my rim. And that's literally just a square primitive, which you can create using Create and New Primitive. Or you can load a square into the scene from Blender, which is something else I've also sometimes done. And in this case, I believe that I have put a cutout opacity map, which looks like a circle. But even if I did not do that, my lighting would look very similar. If I turn off that opacity map, it's just a white square. And that's honestly what a lot of my scene lights are. They're just white primitive squares. In the vast majority of my scenes, I'm lighting with either a regular spotlight that you can get from Create and New Spotlight, or a mesh light that's just a plain white square or circle. In this case, over in the Surfaces tab, you can see the settings of my key plane. Since it's a mesh light, if it was a spotlight, the settings would be in Parameters. And I have a luminance of 2000 with the luminance units set to KCD to M squared over M squared. And the temperature is set to 0 because I want this to be not a cold light, not a warm light, but a very neutral white light. Setting the emission temperature to 0 creates a neutral white light. On the rim light, I have a lower luminance. Rim light is always dimmer than my Keylight for the vast majority of my renders. You can use an opposite situation where you have a brighter rim light or even just a rim light, but usually that's to create a specific impression of drama in a scene, and it's not the best way to show off a product because I need people to be able to see the product as well as to like the way that my render looks. If I just care about the look of the render and not advertising a product, I might use just a rim light more often. In this case, the emission temperature is set to 3500. And the reason for that, let me bring up my final result again. You can see this lovely golden rim of light over here on this side of the character, and that is coming from this rim light. 3500 makes a light warmer, and the warmer a light is, the more it shifts toward yellow and then red. So I have my warm light, my rim light coming from this side, and then from over on the left, I have my brighter, colder, more neutral Keylight. So you can see the white light on this side of her body on the left of the character. Okay. Both of these planes are quite large because I wanted the scene to be mostly full of light. I wanted most of it to be visible. That's something that you have to tweak and experiment with based on how many lights are in your scene, what tone mapping you used, and the value of your environment, and also what environment you used. Once again, this is a fully enclosed set, so my environment was never going to have a big effect on the scene, but that is something to remember that's very important. I rendered out to 2000 by 2600 in my render settings tab. That is the size that I normally use for a main promo, and I will send that to Daz, and they may or may not shrink it to 1000 by 1300, but that's the ratio that we have to use for the main. Some others will be 1300 by 1000, and even some will be other ratios than that, because now Daz allows us to basically do any ratio or scale of render that we wish, as long as it's big enough to be nice and clearly seen by the customer. Now, another important note here. I don't believe I used any filters here. I did not. I don't believe I changed my progressive rendering settings at all. I did not. My render mode is set to photoreal. And in the Advanced tab, under Canvases, you see I've checked Canvases here, and I have selected 4 different canvas types: Beauty, Depth, Light Group, and Environment Lighting. This is important because you can get a more HDR-looking render by rendering out to canvases and then compositing them. This doesn't change the look of lighting ultimately, but it just makes everything look a little better than it otherwise would. So I'm going to show you what post work I did, and indeed what post work I do in essentially every render. Sometimes I'll just do a beauty canvas, but right now Daz really wants us to do certain things with these renders, especially vignetting. And vignetting, while you can do it in the render itself, I'm not even sure where that is on here. It might be under filtering. I don't see it. Somewhere on here there's an option to do vignetting in Engine. I've never liked it, and it takes longer, so I pretty much never do it. I just do it in post work because it's much faster. So the next part of our tutorial will be in the GIMP. Here I am in the GIMP. You don't have to use the GIMP. You can use any 2D image software of your choice, such as Photoshop or Krita. There are many, but the GIMP is free. It's open source. I've been using it a long time, and it has a lot of good features. And, you know, I just like the interface. Maybe that makes me a little weird. I know a lot of people don't care for the interface of the GIMP, but I do. So here I have opened the EXR file of my beauty canvas. You can see down here where it says Canvas 1 Beauty EXR. I have duplicated that to a second layer, and let me hide all of these others so you can see. Now, the original beauty canvas looked like this. It came in very white, and I went to Colors and Exposure and set the exposure sharply different in order to make this show up the way I wanted. That's just a note sort of parenthetically. And I've duplicated the beauty canvas, and on this duplicate file, I Let's see, can I hide my mask? I can. I'm going to disable my mask for a second. This is very blurry, as you can see. I have blurred this using filters and blur and Gaussian blur. And you can see you can drag this up and down to make the scene blurrier. Cancel that. And then I have, let me enable the mask. The layer mask that I have here, I'm going to press Alt and click on it so you can see just the mask itself. I have the opacity set to 27 there, but I turned it all the way up so you can see it. This is what the mask looks like. This is the depth canvas that was outputted by DAZ Studio, which I opened and copied over into this channel, into the mask. And what that does is all of the things that are black are foreground objects, and all the things that are white are background objects, and there's sort of a blend or gradient between them. So things that are black are hidden on this layer. So when I have applied that to the blurry layer, the result is that all of the black objects are not blurry, but the white objects are blurry. So turn that back. So here it is with the opacity of that layer all the way up. You can see I've got a very sharp foreground and a very blurry background. I didn't want that much of a contrast. So I actually turned the opacity down to 27 about. And that gives me some softer focus on the background and sharper focus on the foreground without that sort of astigmatism look. I'm sorry, I apologize to anyone with astigmatism, but without that sharply unfocused look in the background. So that's our beauty canvas and our blurred beauty canvas with the depth canvas as a mask. The next thing I have here is, I believe, the light group. Now the light group, let's see, is set to opacity 15 and soft light mode. Here's the mode drop down over here. And that just makes things a little brighter, a little sharper. And then I also have my environment map, which is almost black. It's very dark because I didn't have a tremendous effect of the environment on the scene. But with opacity at 14 and soft light mode on, it creates a nice, more depthful, contrasted lighting, as opposed to having nothing, or here we have just the bright light, and here we have the bright light and the environment layer, the environment canvas that was outputted by DAZ Studio. And then what I did here, this says visible because I had all of those things showing, and I right-clicked and chose New from Visible, and it created a new layer that was just everything that was visible to that point, because at that point I wanted to add in a vignette. Now I'm going to make that visible here. Lately, DAZ 3D specifically have been requesting that I vignette more renders. I think they may have been requesting that of everyone, but they definitely have requested it of me personally. This is set to multiply mode. Let me set it to normal so you can see what that looks like. You can create a vignette very easily. In fact, I'll delete this one and I'll show you how to make one. To create the roughest, simplest kind, I'm just going to go to paint mode, which I did by hitting P. It's automatically set to black. And I just painted around the edges and corners kind of sloppily here. If I really want it to be symmetrical, I would just paint one side and then mirror it. But in this case, I'm just going to be a little quick and dirty here, until I've created a frame that comes out more in the corners than on the sides. Clean it up with the eraser, which you can activate by hitting Shift-E in the GIMP, and just hitting P again to go back to paint when I'm ready to paint more. So there's sort of I've created sort of a rough black frame. That's going to be my vignette. And then I'm going to hit Shift-B to activate the fill. And up here on the left, I will switch the foreground and background, so it should fill white. There it is. And now I'm going to Filters and Blur and Gaussian Blur. And I am going to turn that way up. And here we go. I've got a nice blurry vignette filter. I can choose the degree to which I want that blurred. And now I can set that to multiply mode. And it creates this sort of framing effect. And I can turn the opacity of that up or down so that it just creates more of a focus on the center of my scene. And then I have all of these layers saved as an XCF file, Alt-F, S, and I can export that to JPEG for my final render using File, Export As, and just choosing where to save the file. And that's how I get my final render. I will look next at one of the renders from my Scorpionfolk product. Okay, while my scene is loading, I just wanted to point out that another way that you can get some excellent pointers on how to create good lighting and camera work in Iray is to purchase one of the add-ons for Iray for Doc Tomalin's products. For example, the Claustrum Iray add-on is for a very old product, the Cloister, and its texture add-on, Claustrum. And you can see what that looked like in the original 3D-Light promos, or Poser. I actually don't know if they used Poser or 3D-Light for those old renders originally. But it looks very different even with those same meshes and these textures in the final Iray render. And Jack includes scene files that are used in this promo artwork, which is amazing because you can just look straight at the promo scenes that he did and dissect them for your own benefit and learning in terms of how he did the lighting and how he did the cameras and how he did the atmosphere sets. So that's something that I just highly, highly recommend. I've actually found them very educational myself. Here we are looking at one of the promo scenes for a Scorpionfolk product. I have Genesis 8 male. Of course, I have conformed the shield harness and scorpion body from that set and posed them. This pose came with that set, so I just applied that directly to him. His earrings, let's see, what did those earrings come with? I'm not sure actually what set the earrings came with, but the hair is definitely the Wylona hair. And the character, I used the Astraeus eyebrows. I think the whole character is Astraeus. It is. It's Astraeus for Ashan 8, this character. And I don't know if I modified his settings for his surfaces. Let's check. It appears I did not. It appears that this is his default setting, or a setting that he came with. I don't have to do a lot to skin textures lately. I don't even have to use the beautiful skin sets on a lot of them recently because a lot of artists just do much better shader work than I feel was often available back when the figures were new. So that's Genesis 8. This right here is a cave set that is also sold in the Daz store. I made no changes to that. And the lights that it comes with are just some lamp flames, I believe. I didn't use any of the cameras that it came with. Once again, I created a camera. And I believe this time, this time I left the focal length at default 65 because I wanted a closer pull-in on the character. And this time, however, I did use depth of field, so I'm going to shift to perspective view by clicking on the drop-down on the top right. And that lets me look at this through the perspective view camera and look at my other cameras through this camera. So now I can actually see that camera. It's called default camera in the scene tab here. And you can see the depth of field planes that are on. When you click off, they go away, but with them clicked on, you can see these two planes of focus here. And what's between those planes of focus is what the camera will focus on. So the f-stop controls the distance between those two planes. So when I scroll upward, you can see the planes get further apart. When I scroll inward, they get closer together. And this middle plane in between them is more or less where the camera will be focused. But everything that's between those two planes will be focused and not blurry, and things that are outside it will be more soft-focused and have a little bit of blur. Now, the lighting of this scene is actually even simpler than the other one, I think. I turned down the environment intensity 2.5. I used the default tone mapping, and I just used spotlights here. They're not even from any set. I just used create and spotlight twice. And then I set these two spotlights in my key position. You can actually look through the view of your spotlight from this drop down here. So if I click on the drop down and instead of camera choose spotlight 1, now you can see that my key light is aimed at him from sort of a pullback position. And Spotlight 2, my rim light, is above and pointed down at him, just like this. And I can also see those lights through the perspective view camera. You can see that it has tinted the rim light up here because I believe I did actually tint the rim light blue. I did in the parameters under the light tab. Because these are point lights and not mesh lights, you can see where it says color, and I've changed the color to blue. You can change it to any color. I've left the luminous flux at, let's see, it's like 1.5 million, something like that. The temperature is at 0 so that I don't have a hot or cool contribution from the light itself other than the color that I've added. That's the rim light. And the key light here is just a white light. It looks like no, it isn't just a white light. Look at that. I've actually left the temperature lower on that key light at 3500 to make it nice and warm. So the final render, which you can see here, he's got a nice warm light shining on him from his front and right, and the light from above and behind him is blue. You can see the blue light on the statue and on the ground. And I have these nice sharp shadows. And the reason I have sharper shadows is because the lights are small and far away. The bigger and closer the light is, the softer your shadows are. So for more dramatic shadows, you generally want a smaller light that is farther away. I don't have any atmosphere pieces in this one. There's nothing to add dust effects or anything like that. So that's pretty much all there was to it. Let's see if I did a canvas. I think I did. Yep, in canvases I used a beauty canvas. And this is a 1000 by 1300 render, a standard ratio for promos. Tone mapping was default. I did not use any filtering, nothing like that. And I don't do vignetting in the render itself, as I've mentioned before. So at this point, everything's set up like this. The character is posed. I didn't really make any changes to his shaders. My lighting involves 2 lights from in front and behind, my key light and rim light. I turned down the environment light to keep it from coming out flat. And then I hit Control-R, and I got this right here. Now, I didn't exactly get that right there. What I got was an EXR file, and I then opened that EXR file in the GIMP. I'll show you actually exactly what that looked like. It looked like this. It was completely whited out, because they come out at an incredibly high exposure. So in the GIMP, I then went to Colors and Exposure, and in the Exposure dialog, I set the exposure to, I think, -14. Let me check. Yep, -14. And hit OK. And now I have this nice, pretty deep colored render. I didn't do, as you can see in the final version, let's see, looks like I closed it, but I didn't actually do vignetting on this one because the actual lighting of the scene created some darker areas in the corners without me having to do that, and focused more attention on the center of the scene. So I think if there's anything I've forgotten to mention here, it might be his expression. I believe I dialed in a facial expression. Let me look. So clicking on the head of Genesis 8 male under pose controls, I will check currently used, and I used a mixture of expressions: fierce, frown, glare, and rage. I just dialed these into different amounts until I got the look that I wanted, and that's pretty subjective. And you may notice that how he looks in the promo preview there, as regards his expression, isn't quite how his expression finally comes out. So you may need to do some spot renders with the expression before you get it the way that you want. And the way that you can do a spot render is up at the top of the bar here. There is a little icon that looks like a camera, or you can hit Alt-Shift-C. And under the Tool Settings tab, if you don't have a Tool Settings tab, you can go to Window and Panes Tabs and Tool Settings, but you want one. And so then you click on New Window or Viewport. New Window will render your preview into a new window based on your render size. Viewport will just render it in this window right here. I just want to render in this window right here to check my facial expression. So I then clicked and dragged in the scene, and when I let go, it started rendering to my preview. And it's going to take a minute because this is a pretty dense scene and it has a dynamic hair in it. I don't think the dynamic hair is actually going to show up in our spot render, but let's see if it does. Usually if you render in the viewport in Iray, it does not show dynamic hair. If I were just to go up here to the drop down and choose the Iray Render View option, I would not get the hair showing up. I would have to go to a new window. No, it looks like it is showing up in the Spot Render tool. Excellent, excellent. There we go. So you can see that's what my expression will look like in my final render, and I can find that out without having to render the entire scene. Okay, there's that. And then it hasn't quite finished yet. But ultimately, this is what I ended up with, and that's how I ended up with it. There is no big secret to this. It's just use a Keylight, use a rim light, turn down your environment tab. Don't ever render with just an HDRI for lighting. 99% of the time, that's not going to turn out well, and it's not going to give the dramatic high contrast lighting that you want for a lot of your scenes. So that's what I have for today. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen, and others. If there is a different render that I've done that you would like me to dissect for you in a video, please let me know in the comments, or you can tweet me at SickleYield3D, and I will try to do another video. If it's an older one, I may not still have the file, but anything from 2020 or 2021, I should still have it, and I should be able to do that for you. So, thank you very much for watching, and happy rendering!